The draconian military siege, media and communication blackout in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir continue unabated. Extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests and detentions, and other atrocities enabled by the draconian laws are now the new normal in IIOJK. Pakistan strongly condemns these continuing grave violations of human rights and curbs on fundamental freedoms by the Indian occupation forces. India must be held accountable for these crimes against the innocent Kashmiri people. Despite India's denial of access to international media, human rights and international organizations, the grave situation of human rights in IIOJK has been extensively covered by international media, reported by the UN and prominent human rights organizations, and have been raised at numerous platforms, including world parliaments. Therefore, we have seen that despite India continuously peddling false propaganda and trying to push its sham narrative of so-called normalcy in IIOJK, the global concern and censure of Indian atrocities in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir has continued, especially since India's illegal and unilateral actions of 5th August 2019. In this regard, as you recall, the United Nations Security Council has discussed the issue of Jammu and Kashmir on 3 occasions since 5th August 2019. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has issued 2 reports in 2018 and 2019, making specific recommendations, including the institution of an independent commission of inquiry to investigate the gross and systematic human rights violations by India in the occupied territory. A number of special procedures, rapporteurs of the Human Rights Council have expressed serious concerns and have remained engaged on the human rights dimension in the IIOJK. The OIC, on its part, has consistently voiced its support for the legitimate struggle for self-determination of the Kashmiri people and has condemned the human rights violations in IIOJK. OIC has also demanded revocation of all illegal measures taken by India since 5th August 2019, including those designed to alter the demographic character and structure of the occupied territory. This has been reiterated recently during the ongoing 48th session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva on 14th of September. The High Commissioner for Human Rights herself, in a report to the Human Rights Council session earlier this week, expressed specific concerns about Indian authorities' restrictions on public assembly and frequent communication blackouts that continue. Hundreds of people remained in detention for exercising their right to the freedom of expression, and journalists facing ever-growing pressure and ongoing use of Unlawful Activities Prevention Act throughout India that was worrying, as the High Commissioner said in a statement, and with these cases being the highest in case of the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. India must realize that it cannot keep the Kashmiris silent through oppression and illegal occupation, and cannot ignore the calls for bringing an end to its human rights violations in IIOJK. International community is increasingly becoming the voice of the Kashmiri people. And in this regard, Pakistan continues to inform and sensitize the world about the grave and persistent human rights violations being committed by Indian occupation forces in Jammu and Kashmir. On 12th September, as you are aware, we have presented a comprehensive dossier containing concrete evidence of egregious human rights violations in IIOJK, exposing the true face of Indian occupation. This dossier has been made public. It is also being widely shared with members of the international community. It contains specific recommendations and expectations from the international community to fulfill its obligations towards the besieged Kashmiris by playing their part to end India's tyranny and oppression, and to compel the Government of India to allow free access to special procedure mandate holders of the Human Rights Council for independent investigations of human rights violations and other recommendations, including forcing India to comply with its international obligations and allow the Kashmiris to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination as enshrined in international law and relevant UN Security Council resolutions. The presentation of this dossier is yet another step towards sensitizing the international community about India's rogue behavior and defiance of international law and all humanitarian norms. This is time for the international community to act before it's too late for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. You would also recall that in November last year, Pakistan presented a detailed dossier providing irrefutable evidence of India's active planning, promoting, aiding, abetting, financing, and execution of terrorist activities in Pakistan. Later, as you are aware, the findings of EU Disinfo Lab corroborated Pakistan's long-standing position that about India's nefarious designs and smear campaign aimed to malign Pakistan. Well, you have seen that Indian propaganda in that regard continues, but it is also being effectively countered and exposed by independent sources.